Hello students, welcome to AriserTalent. As you know, we are studying control and coordination. Okay, this is very important chapter. In my previous lecture, I taught you the meaning of control and coordination, as well as I taught you the different type of control and coordination in plants and animals. In that lecture, I taught you about the nervous system. Now we are going to talk about the arrangement of neurons. What are neurons? Neurons generally are the nerve cells. Okay, as I told you that the nervous system is made up of special cells which is known as nerve cells. Okay, so here we are going to talk about those nerve cells, means the arrangement of nerve cells or neurons. Arrangement of neurons. Actually, these neurons are not connected to each other. Okay, they lie end to end and forms a chain. Fine. Let me mention. Generally, they lie end to end in a chain. Neurons lie in end to end. Neurons lie end to end and forms a chain to transmit nerve impulse. Okay, and generally how it is done? When the dendrite receives what? It receives stimulation. Okay, it receives stimulus or stimuli. When dendrite of one neuron receive stimulus, then it pass it to the cell body. Okay, then from the cell body it is passed to the axon, and from the axon it is passed to the axon terminal, and from the axon terminal it is passed to the passes through nerve impulse. Okay, then it is passes to the other nerve, or I must say this passes to other nerve, passes to the other nerve. Now how it happens? Actually what happens, as I told you the structure of what? I told you the structure of neuron. Here I must go with it. Okay, as I told you the structure of neuron, in that I told you that it has dendrite. Okay, then dendrite pass the stimuli to the cell body and it ends with the axon terminal. When the impulse is passed to the axon terminal, then it when it comes in the contact with the other neuron, then it passes the stimuli to the next by the help of dendrite. Now the thing is synapse. What is synapse? What is synapse? Synapse is the gap between two neurons. As I told you that the nerve cells or neurons are not connected with each other. Okay, so the gap between these neurons is known as synapse. Okay, let me mention that the gap between the neurons is known as synapse. Okay, now this synapse plays an important role in the transmission of impulses. Okay, how it plays an important role? Let me explain you. Look here. As I told you that when any nerve cell receives any stimulation through the dendrite, then it comes to the cell body, then to the axon, and through the axon it comes to the what? It comes to the axon terminal. Now what happens when axon terminal receives any stimulation? Okay, then it expands and form presynaptic knob. Here we can see this is the presynaptic knob. Let me mention, it is presynaptic knob. It's presynaptic knob. Okay, and this part is post synaptic depression. Okay, as I told you that when a dendrite receive stimulus or then it pass to the cell body, then it goes to axon, axon to the axon terminal. Now the thing here is it is part of axon terminal. As I told you that when the axon terminal receives any stimulus or receives stimuli, then the end means it expands and forms presynaptic knob. Why it is known as presynaptic? Because the gap between the what? Between the axon terminal and the other neuron means the dendrite of other neuron, this gap is known as what? This gap is known as synapse. Okay. Now what happens when it receives some stimulation or receives some stimuli, then it expands and form presynaptic knob. Now these synaptic vesicles release some chemical that is known as neurotransmitter. Okay, what they release? They release some chemical that is known as neurotransmitter. Fine, then this neurotransmitter diffuses. Pay attention, this neurotransmitter diffuses between the gap. Okay, this gap means it diffuses in the synapse, and why? To come in the contact with the what? To come in the contact with the chemoreceptor of postsynaptic depression. Clear? Let me explain you again. When the axon terminal receives some stimulus, then it expands and the vesicle inside it, which is known as synaptic vesicle, they release some chemical which is known as neurotransmitter. Okay, then these neurotransmitter diffuse, the molecules of neurotransmitter diffuse in the synapse and come in the contact with the chemoreceptor sites. Fine. So this is all about thus we can say that this stimuli is passed into the other neurons. Okay, so this is the complete process of transfer of impulse. Okay, or I must say passes of impulse. Next is passes of impulse. Next topic is passes of impulse. How it takes place? Okay, passes of impulse, generally as I told you that stimulus, when dendrite receive any stimulus, then it passes it to the cell body, cell body pass it to the axon, axon pass it to the axon terminal, and then it is passes through the what? It is passes through what? It is passes through other impulse or other nerve. Passes to other nerve by the help of dendrite again. Okay, now let me explain you the whole process. The receptor, these dendrites are known as receptor also, these dendrites, because they are receiving the stimulation. Okay, they are receiving some stimuli. So when they receive it, then they pass it to the cell body. Let me explain. When an axon receive stimuli or stimulus, it passes stimulus to its terminal, it passes it to its terminal. Okay, this terminal, this axon terminal, this axon terminal expands and forms presynaptic knob. Clear? It forms what? It forms presynaptic knob. Now the vesicle in it, those are known as synaptic vesicle. Then synaptic vesicle releases what? It is releasing neurotransmitter, releases chemicals called neurotransmitter, okay. Molecules, let me mention here, molecules of neurotransmitter diffuses in the synaptic cleft. Next, neurotransmitter molecules diffuse in the gap between the two neurons, means which is, this gap is known as synaptic cleft, okay, to reach the what? Chemoreceptor site, okay. Thus we can say that the impulse is passed to the other neuron, okay. And at the time, what happens? The dendrite of other, here as I mentioned you that the axon terminal expands and forms presynaptic knob. At the same time, here when the we must say already other neuron is there, because as I told you that neurons are forming a chain, fine. So when this axon terminal will expand and will release the will form the synaptic knob, at the same time the dendrite of other neuron will form the what? Will form the postsynaptic depression, okay, and then it will receive the impulse. So this is the passage of impulse. Thus impulse is passed to the other neuron, okay. So this is the complete process of passage of impulse. Clear? Hope it is clear to you. Now we will talk about the types of neurons. Generally there are three types of neurons. What are they? Sensory neurons, motor neurons and reflexive neuron, okay. Okay, now we will talk about types of neurons. Next is types of neurons. Before that, I must switch it off so that we can talk about the neurons. Okay. Generally, there are three types of neurons. One is sensory neuron, another is motor neuron, and third is relaying neuron. Sensory neuron, also known as receptor. then motor neuron, motor neurons, and the third one is relaying neurons. First of all, we will talk about sensory neurons. Okay, so sensory neurons, generally they are found in the sense organs. Okay, they are found in sense organs. Fine. Now what happens when they receive stimuli from dendrine? Then it passes them to the central nervous system, means to brain and spinal cord. They receive stimuli from dendrite. Okay, they receive stimuli in dendrite and pass, or I must say and transmit impulse to the central nervous system. Central nervous system means brain and spinal cord. Okay. Next is motor nerve or motor neurons. Okay. Sensory neurons, as they receive stimuli, these are known as receptor. Okay. Motor neurons, as they get what they do, generally what they do, as they receive the stimuli from the sense organs. Okay, and they receive stimuli from the what? They receive stimuli from the central nervous system. Okay, then they pass it to the other neuron. Okay, so they are known as effector. The dendrites, okay, or I must say the dendrites of these neurons synapse with other neuron with dendrite of other neuron, with dendrite of other neuron. Okay, then they pass or I must say then they transmit impulse into them. Okay, so I must say with axon of sensory, with axon of sensory, dendrite of sensory, nerves, okay, or sensory neuron in the central nervous system, okay, and transmit the dendrites of these neurons synapse with the axon, I must say, then the dendrites of, just a minute, then the dendrites of these neurons synapse with axon of, let me clear, the dendrites of these neurons synapse with the axon of sensory nerves. Okay, because dendrites are connected, then they pass the impulse to the axon. Okay, now it is clear, the dendrites of these neurons synapse with axon of sensory neuron in the central nervous system and transmit and transmit impulse to them. Okay, and transmit impulse or stimuli to them. Next, we are going to talk about relaying neurons. What are relaying neurons? Relaying neurons are found in the central nervous system and they connect both sensory and motor nerves, or we must say that they serve as a link between the sensory nerve and the motor nerve. These neurons are present in central nervous system, like brain and spinal cord, Okay, they serve as a link between what? Sensory nerve and motor nerve. They serve as a link between sensory nerve or neuron is the same thing, sensory nerve and motor nerve. Okay, sensory nerve or motor nerve means sensory neuron and motor neuron. So now let me explain you, there are three types of neurons. What are they? Sensory neurons are generally present in the sense organs, then they receive the stimuli and then they pass it to the central nervous system, means to brain or spinal cord. Okay, so that they can take some action. Fine. Here is motor neuron. What happens when these motor neurons, they have, as I told you, every neuron has three parts: dendrite, cell body and axon. So what happens in it? The dendrites of these neurons, synapse means there is a gap between the two nerves. Okay, so the synapse with the axon of sensory nerve. Okay, as I told you that two nerves are connected, they are not connected with each other, but there is a gap between them. And in my previous lecture also I told you that what is the process of passage of impulse. So we can understand that the dendrites of these neurons come in the contact with what? Come in the contact of axon of the sensory nerve. Fine. Then they pass the impulse to the muscles or glands from the central nervous system. Why? Because this is passing the stimuli to the central nervous system. Okay, so now from the central nervous system, these motor nerves will pass the stimuli to the muscle or gland. I must say pass to them means pass to muscle or gland. Here I can mention muscles or gland. Okay, now third type of neuron is relaying neuron. Generally it serves the link between the sensory neuron or the motor neuron. So here in this lecture we studied about the arrangement of neurons. Okay, then what is the passes of impulse, and then we studied the types of neurons. Hope you all got it. Thank you.